private arrangements. And part of that constitutional right to privacy is the freedom of association. And so from this, we have the ability to create private associations. And these are things that have played a huge role in all of Western civilization, really. And everyone's heard of very famous, old, powerful, private associations. There are things like Alcoholics Anonymous and the Boy Scouts. Every political party is a private association. Sports leagues and things like that as well. So a PMA is a private membership association, and that is that fundamental constitutional right of freedom of association in privacy as living human beings, not as the straw man. And what that means is that we're operating under common law, where the threshold for the government to be involved in our affairs has to do with causing harm and violating the rights of another human being. And this is as opposed to in the public side of law, where the government gets involved for any number of arbitrary commercial statute violations. You didn't fill out a piece of paperwork properly. Any number of things can get the government involved because there's just this mountain of red tape and regulations that govern commercial transactions. And part of the spell that's been cast over humanity is in losing the knowledge of the private side of the law and the fact that we're flesh and blood human beings and not the legal fiction. And that really started in 1933, where in the United States, a Securities Act was passed where they made the legal distinction between a natural person and a legal person. And this is where the idea comes from that a corporation is a person. You might have heard of that. A corporation is a person, has rights and such. Well, your name in all capital letters is a corporation that represents you, the natural person. And so part of this spell is the internal contradiction that is created when we, on the one hand, we say, I am a divine sovereign being. But then on the other hand, when we're asked to identify ourselves to any kind of authority in the world, we identify ourselves as a corporate fiction that is owned by the government and beholden to all the commercial code and is basically something that is a source of income for the government through debt. Now, that's a major contradiction, and it's my belief that this is a powerful legal and spiritual technology and a form of activism to understand the way the system is designed around us, this matrix that we live in, and how it was designed in some ways to empower us. And yet we feel this collective oppression from the system. And a lot of that is simply because we're not operating according to the design. We're not operating the way that it was designed to protect us and our rights. And so one way that we can correct that is through the creating this movement you all are a part of right now, reclaiming that knowledge, embodying that knowledge, and through the power of the 100th monkey effect, that will spread, and there will be an awakening of, hey, we can actually live through the constitutional rights, and this goes for every English common law country, Great Britain, Canada, Australia, all those. And in America, it's just that the religious freedom aspect is especially strong. And that's why we have created ministries here based in the United States because regardless of what country they're based in, they can operate in all Hague Convention nations, which is all the nations that you pretty much want to operate in. Apparently not Indonesia though, huh, Will?
No. They were a strong objection to the apostle.
Yeah. So that is the basic foundation, is rooted in the Enlightenment ideas that are enshrined in English common law and in the Constitution and the Constitution of all English common law nations. And the way that this happens is you simply declare the authority that you already have. And this is a real paradigm shift because most people are conditioned to believe that authority, legal authority especially, comes from the government. And if you create a nonprofit, you have to ask the government for permission, you have to fill out paperwork, and you have to be approved, and you can have your status revoked for any number of issues. And in private law, that's not how it works. In private law, you declare, you embody the authority that you already have by declaring it so. And through the power of 3 people witnessing a declaration and signing their names on a piece of paper, just like, the founding fathers of the United States of America did when they signed the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights, you are basically founding your own sovereign nation in a way, because the right to your freedom of religion in the Constitution is named as being bestowed by God, as being bestowed by the Creator itself and not coming from government. And the government itself, at least in the United States, is named as one nation under God. So you're creating like a private trust account with the Creator of the universe as you define that for yourself. And that's a completely private, legal, contractual right of association that the government has nothing to do with. And that's the difference of being a flesh and blood, natural human with divinely bestowed rights, rather than operating as the corporate fiction that has privileges.
Oh!
So then, Teo, could you list out a couple of benefits as we're opening up the 508? What are the benefits and how is that practically applicable?
Yeah, so the benefits are many, and it's basically being private in all of the things that are associated with operating in privacy. And if you're having a private association formed under a religious or spiritual purpose, then you have further benefits of protection for things like plant medicine and so forth. But what does this mean to be in private? What it means is the government will recognize your right to privacy and give you a tax ID number that you could use to have a bank account. You can have a brokerage account. You can deed property in most countries in the world. And the government has tagged this special tax ID number for this type of organization, for a church or a private association, so that the government knows that you have a mandatory exemption from filing a tax return as a private organization, and a mandatory exemption from notifying the government of your existence. So you don't notify the government of your existence. You don't ask the government for permission, and the government cannot take away your permission to exist. They cannot simply revoke your nonprofit status because they didn't grant it in the first place. You're automatically assumed by the government to be nonprofit and tax exempt simply by you privately signing your articles of association in private. No one else knows you've done it. And the government can simply be notified that you exist if you want to get their special tax ID number to have a bank account. But you only need to do that if you want to have a bank account. And if you have a bank account, that's all that's involved. Now you have this bank account with this special ID number attached to it, so you can use that to raise millions of dollars, purchase real estate in different countries, and the government and the IRS will never wonder why they've never received a tax form, even though they can see that you're buying all this property or whatnot, because that's part of the public record. The other thing is that the power of being private is that the legal jurisdiction that all of the members' interactions are governed by is the one that you create. Now, the limit to where that extends to is in causing harm. So just because you're operating in private and just because you have religious freedom, it does not give you the right to cause harm to others or to violate the rights of others. But everything short of causing harm is pretty much fair game. That could be, you could sell each other alcohol. All the members can buy and sell each other alcohol without an alcohol license. During the Prohibition in the United States, after the Prohibition ended, a bunch of states left it up to the counties about whether to legalize alcohol again or not when the Prohibition ended. So in places like Texas, they have hundreds of counties, or a bunch at least, where alcohol is still illegal. They're called dry counties, but you can drink there in private drinking clubs, which is essentially a bar that you become a private member of just by signing a piece of paper that says you're now a member. And now you can drink alcohol, and it's not a commercial transaction, it's a private transaction. And so whatever the rules are of the private drinking club is the rules that you have to obey while you're there. Similarly, if you have a church and part of your belief is ayahuasca, and you believe that ayahuasca is good for children as well, as the Santo Daime Church does, then as long as there's no evidence that it's causing harm, you have the right to feed children ayahuasca in your private congregation. Even though it may be prison sentence for adults to consume ayahuasca outside of your congregation, a few hundred feet away.
And does that extend? So, for example, I hear that in the United States, I can, under the church, have ayahuasca. But what about here in Bali or Europe? Does that protection extend?
That's a great question. And you have the ability to operate these types of entities in all Hague Convention countries, which is most countries you'd want to in the world. Indonesia is not included as one of those, although they're not like an adversary of the United States or anything like that. So I'm sure they wouldn't have a problem with you being there. But they have no problem with foreigners being there and foreign organizations operating there for the most part. Now, when you're in another country, though, your religious freedom doesn't extend to violating the laws of other countries. So if you're in Canada or Australia or New Zealand or Great Britain, you can have headquarters there, you can have offices there and raise millions of dollars there and have projects, building things or doing whatever there. But you can't break the laws of those countries. You have to obey the law. And each of those countries has a different line where they draw religious freedom. In the United States, it's very strong. There's a lot of other countries in the world that are totally okay with you having plant medicine. It's pretty normal in places like Latin America, a lot of places, Brazil. But Indonesia is especially strict on anything drug related, and they're not going to tolerate anything like that. So that's something you got to be careful of. And that's why, people go to certain countries to do ayahuasca retreats and iboga retreats and these kinds of things where it's part of the culture and it's very lax. But in the United States, the legal protection is extremely strong for this sort of thing.
Taylor, just to expand on that, so I agree with what you're saying. Indonesia is not part of the Hague Convention, so the apostle stamp cannot extend the legal rights in the United States to other member countries, obviously Indonesia here, but it can extend the legal rights to all other member countries, which does include Canada and some of the other countries you listed. So if we were to apostle stamp documentation that says we have the right as a member of the ministry to work with ayahuasca, in theory we should be able to have the right to work with that medicine in all of those member countries. Indonesia isn't one, but some of the ones you mentioned are. So can you clarify?
Absolutely. Yeah, just to clarify, each of those countries has a different place where they draw the line. And I don't know where that is for all of those countries. I know in the United States, it's a lot of protection. It's the most protection. So it includes, giving drugs to children. Other countries might allow it to a certain degree or to a certain point that is to a lesser degree, and you'd have to look at the case law to understand exactly where that line is. But if other people are holding, for instance, ayahuasca ceremonies in those countries, and that's an established legal precedent, then that's fine. But there might be some things that cross the line in those countries where America might have more robust protection for.
And to speak on that, the reason he keeps using the analogy of giving children drugs is because there was actually a case that you can share, Tao, that proved how powerful the 508 is based off of a court. Can you share that? And so he doesn't have a jurisdiction of the whole world. That's what he's trying to say.
Yeah, this is the Santo Daime Church is a church that originated in Brazil that spread around the world. And they are an ayahuasca church. They have ceremonies where they dress in all white and they stand up and they sing hymns to Mother Mary under the influence of ayahuasca. And I'm from the Ashland, Oregon area in Southern Oregon, and the Santo Daime Church has been a very big part of that community for decades. And they have their monthly ayahuasca ceremonies at the local Jewish synagogue in downtown Ashland. So every month at the synagogue in Ashland, for decades, there have been people taking ayahuasca and giving it to children and singing hymns to Mother Mary with no problems. But in 1996, I believe it was, there was a man who sued the church because he found out that his divorced wife was taking their 10-year-old daughter to the church, and the daughter was having ayahuasca fed to her at the church. And he found out about this and was very upset that his daughter was being taken to some cult and being fed drugs. So he pressed charges and he lost the case because there's no sign that there's any harm being done to the children from them taking ayahuasca. And so the court ruled that the mother can continue to take the child to church and feed her ayahuasca, and there's nothing the father can do about it, as long as both the child and the mother consent.
So, in this case, they rented a building to be able to do this. So what is the procedure there for something which is not the property of the church? You're still allowed to enact your religious freedoms in the location that's not, let's say, the property, and you still have agreements in place. How would that work?
Yeah, you'll just have that written into your rental contract agreement.
That's it.
Yep.
Someone had a question? You have a question?
Yeah, I guess I have two questions. One, I have some friends who started a multi-sacrament church in Colorado using a 508. They shared with me there are some very particular pitfalls around incorporation where it might not stand up in court. So I'm curious if you could speak into that. And then my other question is about governance and how to formally link a DAO to a PMA and how to include that in the articles of incorporation.
Okay. Can you say something about the pitfalls that they encountered?
And also, you said there's a pitfall in incorporation. One of the things about the 508c3, 508c1a, is it's unincorporated.
Yeah.
So we, as the university, we are unincorporated. We are not incorporated. So I don't know what they did.
I think I'm probably meant to declare. Is that the appropriate word?
Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. The way it was described to me is that there's certain language that needs to be present in the articles that if it's not there, it may not stand up in court. So there's like a very particular spell casting that needs to be included in order for it to be recognized by the government. Or
Yes. Yes, that is absolutely right. And if you are put in a position where you are in court, it's usually because there's already something that you have gone afoul of that justified an action against you that rose to the level of you being in court, having to defend your right of religious freedom. And once you're in that position, they will use semantic, linguistic tricks to try to trap you into saying the wrong thing. And they will scrutinize the language in your documents and see if it matches the language of what you're saying and all these kinds of things. But that is rare, and it happens because someone claimed harm was caused and there's evidence sufficient to bring them to that place. But one way that I just avoid and sidestep all of that is when a church is going to be holding ceremonies with plant medicine, my advice has always been that they simply become adopted by the Native American church. And I know Chief Manfound Standing of the New Haven Church will adopt you and give you a Native American medicine holder card. And they have already won their legal cases for their ability to serve plant medicine. And so that way you don't have to defend the religious right to sacrament for your untested church. The person serving the sacrament is the person who is adopted and has that medicine card. So they're using the strength of the legal precedent that's already been won by the Native American church to serve the medicine.
And the second question, thank you. The second question is about governance and authorized representation. Like who, if it's a decentralized organization that's using this structure, how do you have authorized representatives and how do you write governance into the bylaws or the articles of incorporation or articles of association?
Yeah, well, the answer is extremely simple and extremely complicated at the same time. The extremely simple answer is that you just figure out what works for you and you write it into the bylaws. And if you want someone to be an authorized representative, then you just write a document that names them as your authorized representative. It's really just about making declarations. You just declare it so. If someone is going to become a minister of your organization, you declare it so. Any major decisions made in your organization are simply declared in meeting minutes documents. The governance structure is whatever you want to make of it, and that's where it becomes extremely complicated, because with a 501c3, a corporate nonprofit, you have pre-made rules for how governance structure works that the government created that you have to obey. In this case, you have very few rules, and the rules are simply that you have to have some sort of structure, bare bones minimum structure. Like, if you have someone who has the veto power on your board, an executive position, there needs to be someone who will assume that role if that person suddenly passes away or is incapacitated and cannot fulfill their responsibilities. The reason for that is that if that happens, you don't want to have a power vacuum that is fought over by the other members of the board of who should assume that executive role. So it's important to have someone pre-named as that person. Another bare bones minimum is you have to have some rule for how the board makes decisions. Otherwise, the board will fight over decisions. And that's pretty much it. It's like you have to have that bare bones structure. But beyond that, it's your own mythology to create. You can create your own titles, your own invented mythological structures of governance. It's all up to you, really. But you just have to document it, in meeting minutes or some kind of declaration, and have some kind of rules for decisions. For the other part of your question about a DAO, that's an interesting place that's being explored. I don't know exactly what your question is there, but I would say you have a DAO and you have a church, and the two have a relationship. And that relationship is created by declaring what the relationship is in documents, once again.
Is it also true that you could have your church be a DAO? Like, do they have to be separate entities?
A DAO has a governance structure that exists on the blockchain. So you could create some kind of like blockchain cyber church kind of thing, but I'm not exactly sure how that would work or what purpose it would serve to do it that way.
So I'm able to add a point here, just remove my question. If you write in the articles of a church or even of a company that the rights to vote in the governance of that is denoted by the token ownership of a specific token, and that token is held within your DAO, then essentially you refuse it to because they have ownership, so you're about to vote for the church.
When you think of DAO as a way to do governance, it's not its own entity within itself.
Right. So when you said there's a relationship, I was thinking it's not really a relationship as much as it is part of your articles.
Well, one example is that if you have a fund and you put it in the bylaws and it's declared that the DAO manages the fund of the church, that's an interrelational, so that it's innovative. Like we get to decide what that relationship is. That's part of what we're in the exploration of. So you decide the governance of how your DAO operates, you decide the governance of how your church operates, what the relationship is. The only thing that DAO does is puts it on a ledger, and so you can have smart contracts, you can have these bylaws live on the blockchain, which is just new. So it's I think like DAO said, it's kind of interrelational. They're not separate, but they inform each other.
They don't need to be separate entities.
No,
But
they're
that was
symbiotic.
not an entity.
Yeah, the DAO doesn't have an entity. The PMA or the FBO, the ministry, would be the entity, and then the DAO is the tool that you're using to record, do accounting, vote, proposals.
Yeah.
So like a Wyoming
Yeah.
now, you still are doing an LLC that then still has people that are the representatives of the DAO, and you're just writing down like the smart contract for the DAO in the application and how it's going to be governed and those things, but it's still, the entity itself is a legal thing that the DAO is how you're
have
Yes.
in the bylaws of the church though, that it's going to be governed by DAOs or by the rules in DAOs.
If you want that to be the way that your church is run, and you want that to be legally represented, yes.
And what happens if it's violated?
What was the question?
What do you mean by violated?
Like, let's say it's in the bylaws of that church that the DAO X is dealing with the governance of said church, and now there is a violation that's within the DAO. Somebody doesn't respect that, and it still says he's acting or she's acting for the church, for example. You know what I mean?
You have to, this is where the bylaws come in. You have to look at the different potential scenarios and create the outcomes and the consequences of the protocol based on the variables that you're putting in motion with your governance model.
I guess what I'm asking is, what's the jurisdiction? Like, who deals with the violation? Where do you report to ultimately? Who enforces the law?
If it gets to that legal point, then
I can answer that question too. So it's similar to what Benjamin was asking, like how do we embed the governance structure into the Articles of Association declaration? And that's really simple but complex. Like how do you decide who decides? And from the DAO perspective, it's membership policy. What is your entry and what is your exit? So if scenario A, B, or C happens, how does conflict resolution take place? What is your internal conflict resolution process? In the declaration, there's an invitation to create your own courts, so you have your own governance, and then if there is an issue, then the DAO comes to the governance, the council, or whatever it is you want to call it, for mediation, and then you have, through the conflict resolution process, ways for someone to be exited, or for them to fall back in line with the agreements and the bylaws.
So you're saying the mediation happened
Within.
yeah.
So within.
It can go to legal if that doesn't work. That's the last.
Anyone can sue the church, anyone can sue your PMA, anyone can sue you down. If they want to take them to the old courts, they can. But then it's up to us to demonstrate that we have the religious freedoms and that we are operating without causing harm. And as long as that's the case, then they haven't got grounds to have any decision made in those courts. Within the organisation itself, within the church itself, it's self-governed. That's the whole point. We're creating our own governance structure. Each PMA, each DAO can decide what that is. And that's one of the very important questions to ask. How do you want to govern your organisation? Who are the governors? How do they decide? Who decides and what is your exit entry policy? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, but whose portion in the end is there someone responsible within the church towards the outside, or is it just like a neutral person in legal terms?
You get to decide that.
No, I mean towards the outside. When you look at it from the outside, people who are not in the church, like somebody's suing the church, we mentioned before, and then who stands there and is responsible? Like, for
Someone
example,
represents
Either
the
the
church,
legal
PR,
representative, which in our case is Teo, or the executive director, which in this case is me. So I would need to go to the Supreme Court and stand up for the rights of the universal ministry, and Teo would be there by my side.
And I think each Shokai temple, we might have it set up differently, where it wouldn't be one person creating the neutral mediation, it might be a whole collective. Like, so every church will have it set up different, what that looks like.
Yeah, I have a question on this topic too. What's the liability of the managing director? Yeah, if the church gets sued for something, like how liable is the person who's managing?
Teo, a simple solution for that, if you could put up the declaration and show the section of the declaration that talks about liability and non-liability for members, that's a direct black and white answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically limited liability like that is standard, where all the advisors, board members, and directors are only liable for themselves, and that's it. So that's pretty standard. But the more important thing here is that the entire organization, because it is private, already has a very high threshold of evidence of harm that needs to be brought against it in order for it to be held liable for the first place, in the first place. So things like committing fraud against someone, causing actual harm, violating the rights of another. These are serious things that need evidence to support them in order for someone to sue you, because the rest of your interaction is governed through contract law and through the agreement that you create. So when you have an event, let's say a live event, and everyone who shows up is a member of your private association, then they are giving up their rights to sue you because they slipped on a banana peel and they want to blame you because you didn't clean it up, right? That would be the threshold in the public side of the law. And that's where you hear all these crazy, insane stories, like a burglar breaks into a house and falls through a skylight and cuts themselves and sues the owner of the house. Someone goes to McDonald's and pours the coffee on themselves and sues McDonald's for the burn. This sort of nonsense is all part of these commercial code statutes that are part of the public, and they're not actual harm in the sense of common law, where someone has to be actually responsible for causing harm. You have to pour the boiling coffee on someone. You have to push them and cause them to slip on the banana, that sort of thing.
So just to expand on that, all of you in coming here and becoming either a grantee, a scholar, a creative, a member, a light leader, tick the box to join the ministry, which means you're agreeing to our declaration, which means you are removing the right to sue us. In the old court system, you're opting into the universal ministry ecclesiastical courts. And also, it means that you're able to transact with each other as member to member. So when you're dealing with each other, for example, here during this month, if you're exchanging offerings and services with each other, you're doing it within our private jurisdiction as one member to another member in private.
We're in the drinking club.
Exactly. And this is how you can turn any online e-commerce enterprise into a private enterprise. You just have a box that they tick at the point of sale saying, I agree to join this private membership association or this spiritual ministry or this 501c1, whatever it might be, with a link to your declaration or your article of association. Same way we do it with Google. We download Google and we have to tick their box to say we agree to their terms and conditions. It's the same thing. And it puts every single person you're engaging with into the private jurisdiction.
And does that still apply in the future? That's specific.
This is great.
As long as you don't run afoul of Indonesian law.
I have a question.
And Indonesian law is great.
Yeah, it's the Wild West out here.
So then, I'm curious, could you give us examples of 508s that you know of that are real-time active that would be relevant to this group and things that they're able to accomplish and create because of the 508 status to inspire us of how we could be using this?
Oh yeah, just think about the Vatican and what they've accomplished.
Who's already on the team? Like, I think so. Who's on the team?
The
Pope don't.
Somebody was asking for the example of modern
Yes.
churches.
Yes. Well, let's see. Last summer, I created a church for a nearly extinct indigenous tribe in Washington State, USA, that does not have federal recognition. And we created a church for them, which is now federally recognized. So the tribe is recognized through their church. And they immediately raised, through the help of my friend, who also has a church, nearly $500,000 to purchase some property that has sacred springs on it to the Native American tribe, where they can build a longhouse and have their congregations and their gatherings and steward these springs into perpetuity. That's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
And I could name eco-village projects. There's a project I just did outside of Austin where they bought a big piece of property. It's a $20 million property, and they're building a big eco-village permaculture center out there, education center. All permaculture, off the grid, everything, biodynamic, all the permaculture good stuff. And they have a donor, a very wealthy donor, and these are like super young, bright, brilliant permaculture people. And this wealthy donor gave them this huge donation in the form of shares of a company they own. And if you sell the shares, you have a huge tax consequence from selling the shares of your company. So what they did is they took their 508 and used the special church EIN to obtain a brokerage account with, I believe, Chase Manhattan, which they used to receive the large amount of corporate shares, which they used as collateral to secure the loan on this $20 million piece of property, which they would put in the name of the church and avoid the property taxes, which are like $35,000 a year.
Yeah, this is helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty inspiring. They were over the moon inspired when they heard about this. And it worked out. They were able to obtain the brokerage account and get the shares and get the property all through private transactions. And they had a kind of a complicated private transaction where they had someone donating shares as a collateral for a loan on a church in a private sale. No problems.
I feel inspired to share that I know of 2 examples of the church that I'm at, and the state showed up to ask questions and inquire and try and enforce. And one of the churches didn't stand up for their rights. They actually welcomed the state in, and then were told that they were doing things that weren't in alignment with their compliance and regulation, and then they ended up setting a 501c3 and becoming a charity and doing other things to then basically succumb to the man. Versus another church that said, no, this is public property, you can't come in, end of. Mm-hmm. So it really does require us to stand up for our rights, and that's why someone like Taylor's done years and years of research and understanding and has many documents to help us understand his research in a very clear and concise way so that we can embody it as quickly as possible.
This feels super important because I also know examples of people that were under certain Native American cards and other like sub-branches that got completely taken down at the state federal level for medicine specifically. If a person's targeted and they're not like tied to the bigger thing, or like you have to be embodied in the entirety of your sovereignty at some level. Like, this is a kind of a multidimensional game where there's like law as a spell, right? Like understanding this as magic at a higher level as multidimensional games. So like I think what you're saying is absolutely important for us to continue to educate. And then within the US itself, there's, I don't know if you're familiar with like the Sandman, or like all that kind of like interesting Strawman, sorry. Sandman. Like these things are crazy, like they will blow your mind. Like being incorporated as basically property when you're born and your birth certificate. Well, it's a rabbit hole that I'm just like, I'm not even ready to go there. But we have to, in this new timeline, to really, there's the higher dimensional side, there's anchor, and then there's the grounded 3D that's like your buffer, your boundary, and we have to hold that. Because I know people that couldn't hold it and they got taken down, they've gone through the courts, they were under Native American church protection, and they still got taken out with intent to distribute and all these other things they were targeted. And so like, you have to be careful with the medicine thing. You can't just assume that you're fully protected in certain states. So there is a state-to-state thing that is, I don't even from the US. And that's all, I don't want to diverge and go fear-mongering, but the piece that you're naming, Will, is an important part of prevention.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Whoever that was talking is absolutely correct. It is a deep rabbit hole indeed. And I want to expound on that and just say that they will crush you if you mess with their interests, even if you just own a company doing anything. Like the business world is ruthless. Like if you undermine another company's business interests or the government's interests, it doesn't matter what you're operating under, that they will apply pressure to you. And so there's the idea of standing up for your rights is incredibly important, but there's another side to this, which is the side of the way of the peaceful warrior, which is that if you're moving into an area where you know the local culture is maybe a little suspicious of what you're doing, right? Let's say you move to a redneck area that's super conservative and you want to create some kind of super hippie, nudist hippie farm church or, something crazy and wild. What you want to do is you want to make friends with your local community. You want to go to the county and make friends with them and get them to like you and not want to go through the effort of trying to find something wrong with what you're doing so they can harass you about it. And that is a mistake that also a lot of people make, which is that they go into an area and they don't sort of read the room, so to speak, and they sort of boldly declare their rights and then step on some toes in the process, and then people come out to your property and start asking questions. So that's another thing to keep in mind, just of working within the culture and the community and that you're operating within. If you have land somewhere, knowing who the people are at the county level, like if you want to have an exemption to the zoning laws, for example, so that the zoning provides for you to be able to have large gatherings of hundreds of people, because you do have to obey zoning laws, then having the county like you and think what you're doing there is a net benefit is what will make the difference in them providing that exemption and changing the zoning law for you. And I also want to talk about something about the what was being discussed earlier with Will about the governance, in that the jurisdiction that we create is the enforcement of that. It is also written into the bylaws. So when you sign or check the box, it says you become a member, and now you're part of the jurisdiction of the association. What's written into the bylaws is that any conflicts that arise between members is to be worked out and mediated in a third-party mediation venue. So that could be a third-party conflict mediation service, or it could be a justice system or court system that we create, which is something that is a bit complicated to create, but we're working on it. I have a friend with a law degree who's working on that. She's passionate about it. There's a Native American model that we can take inspiration from. But what this does is it means that you cannot sue the association or the ministry because you already agreed to air your grievance or your conflict in a third-party venue. Now, if that venue or that third-party mediation service rules against your claim, then you also can't go to the court afterwards and try to sue for the same thing, because the church would just show up and show the court that they agreed to the decisions of the third-party venue, which decided against them already, and the court would throw out the claim.
Yeah, I see Chris has a question, but it's very, very relevant to this. Because we're actually going through the process right now, doing this incubator to establish our governance circle. And we've actually had a governance issue that's manifested in these last few days. So we've experienced what it means to come together in council. Rachel, myself, Therese, Ramayan, Luke, who else? Anyway, there were 7 of us that came together in council to discuss an issue and create a pathway moving forward in terms of conflict resolution. So this is a way to create councils and decentralized decision making rather than being put on one individual like it has been previously as me as the executive director. So each of you have your own freedom to create your own council and your own governance structures within the DAO, PMA. And I know that Chris and Ramayan have like a lot of codes which they shared in their presentation yesterday of how we can come together and create these systems and these structures. It doesn't have to be a fancy court system like the Supreme Court. It can just be a small group of people that are coming together and saying, okay, these are the people we trust to be the council and to be the ones that anchor in the pillars of our tenets, our creeds, our principles, our values, whatever it is that we're setting out as our mission, our purpose, our agreements. These are the people, this is the council that we're entrusting to make those decisions, which you can then distribute out as many members as you want within your DAO. You can include every single person, you can give every single person one voice, one vote, and have every single person involved. Or you can make it like a hybrid DAO where you have a small council and transitions. There's many different ways to do it. Chris?
Yeah, can we just kind of cover the connection between, like, we've spoken about PMAs and also spoken about churches, and like in this context, how those are linked, and like with the universe as overseeing, and like what would happen, just how those are related. Give people a little bit deeper details.
Sure. So Ramayan asked this question the other day, and I gave a pretty simple answer. So if you're looking to start an organisation within an economy, then the right option for you would be a PMA with your DAO. If you're looking to start an economy, then the right option for you would be a faith-based organisation, a ministry with an Anchor DAO. Because as a ministry, as a faith-based organisation, as a 508 and C1A, you can create infinite numbers of PMAs. As an Anchor DAO, you can create an infinite number of DAOs, and they're all related. So the FBO is like the umbrella giving birth to many organizations. The Anchor DAO is the umbrella giving birth to an ecosystem of DAOs. If you want to start one organization, PMA DAO. If you want to start an economy, ministry, Anchor DAO. That make sense?
Yeah.
Why would we want to go within the universe versus create our own FBO?
I just explained that. Either you're an organization that wants to be within an economy, and therefore our economy as the universe ministry, or maybe by a temple or any other group of people that are creating a new economy, versus creating a new economy yourself. So if you want to create an entire economy, start an FBO, start a ministry. That's one idea. I'm not limiting it to that. There's other reasons why you want to set up a ministry as well. But that's the simplification.
So can I ask a follow-up? Is that is there any more rights given to the FBO because it's more faith-based rather than PMA, which doesn't seem to be faith-based?
All of the rights of the faith-based organisation are applied to the PMA. That's like, for example, Teo was saying being adopted by the Native American Church then gives you the rights of the Native American Church to work in medicine. Okay. So every single PMA within the ministry has the same rights as the ministry. Okay. The difference would be that PMA is governed by the council within the ministry. So there is some level of oversight from that umbrella, right? There's a council of the ministry which is then distributing it's an umbrella, so it's like, that's making sense?
The PMA belongs to some higher order that governs
an umbrella. Exactly. Like, for example, if I want to start a VC, I can create my own venture capital structure, or I can be a sub fund within an existing VC. Two very different things. Either I'm benefiting from the existing umbrella that someone's already created, and I'm just going for the simple path, or I'm going for the more complex path where I'm doing all of the licensing, getting everything myself set up, so that I can create as many sub funds as I want. So this is why I distinguish it between building an economy or building an organization.
Just like to understand which will be like these structures, how can we like a jump into a new paradigm? How do you think that these structures can allow us to avoid what has happened with the old paradigm of structures that in somehow has this like wealth accumulation? Like how can we avoid that in this new paradigm? Because let's say in Colombia there was a moment right now where the church, I think pretty much all around the world, Catholic Church are not paying taxes. That also become into a discussion of wealth accumulation, social injustice, economic imbalance. So how can we, like, with this structure, avoid those old paradigms?
Okay. So do your research. Right, do your research and look at the documentation and the structure of whatever it is that you're opting into. So if there's a church out there that is accumulating wealth and can easily see from their declaration who it is that's accumulating all of the wealth within that group, especially if it's on a DAO, because you can see the members and you can see who's accumulating the wealth as opposed to distributing it amongst many. If you look at our documentation, you'll see that we only create PMA structures for organisations that are giving the majority of their resources to the community or a cause. So if you're not going to set up in this way, then we just won't give you a legal structure to play with in the first place. So that's an example of how you can trust in this community, in this club, that it's not accumulations of a small group of people. If you're exploring alternative ministry in another church, look at their declaration, look at how they're structured, find out who the people involved are, and whether they're distributing ownership amongst them.
I have a question.
There was a question here first.
Yeah, I mean, just like also that you asked this question, I think, yeah, it's really important that everybody is aware and clear what they sign into, because we are assuming always that everything comes from a good heart, everything comes from a good place, but giving up your rights to sue one another obviously can also create problems if there is people who are trying to manipulate these churches. So I just want to, without wanting to fearmonger either, just set that up. And I actually did forget my question before the process, but I might raise my hand.
Okay, if you want to come back.
So my question is, can an already oh, go ahead.
Oh, I do have a question that is related. Do you have maybe an example? Now we heard some good examples, but do you also have an example, maybe a word of warning of where, in cases that people thought it was going to, create a good DAO or a good ministry and so on, where it went south, and what were the mistakes where we maybe already can learn to not repeat those?
That's a great question, and I wanted to address something that you said before, which had to do with giving up your rights to sue. And I want to clarify on that, because if someone is causing you harm or committing fraud against you or scamming you, stealing from you, violating your rights in any way, you still have the right to sue. It's just all the arbitrary, frivolous stuff that people, especially in the United States, sue each other over, which is like a bunch of nonsense and bullshit where they make these claims that something happened to them. It's just silly things like that don't apply because you're operating under a private agreement and not a commercial interaction. When you're operating in a commercial interaction, then any number of things can bring a lawsuit. The coffee being served too hot, a banana peel that someone didn't clean up that you stepped on and slipped on, anything like that. But in a private transaction, someone has to have broken their contract, or violated your rights or caused some kind of harm or damage to you or your property in some way.
Okay, so the private law in that sense, I'm Swiss, so I have to still kind of, because we don't have exactly the same public laws as the US, but so that means the private law is not affected then by the.
Of course. Oh, sorry, what's your question?
So the private laws are not affected in essence then.
Are not affected?
Yeah, by the agreements of the association in the history.
Well, the agreements are backed up by private law. Private law is the law that governs the contract agreement. So in the private law jurisdiction, you have people making contracts with each other. And the court, the private law court, will adjudicate cases of contract violation, right? So that's what the private law space is. So if two people make a contract agreement and one of them breaks the contract, then you can take that person to court, and the court that will see that case is a private law court. Now, if that happened in one of our private associations, because the bylaws state that that conflict has to be seen in a private court, not a government court, then you would have to take that conflict to a private court or mediation service of some kind. And they would rule on the contract violation. Does that answer your question?
I think so, yes.
Thank you. So my question is, can an already existing land-based development project that is currently operating as a church 501c3,
508c1.
no, mine,
Oh,
is a 508c,
it's a state church.
yeah, can it make a migration to become what is here in this conversation? If so, what's the process? And also, what are the benefits to migrate?
Question is, how do you transfer from a state church to a free church, and why would you do it?
Yeah. So you would just create the free church and let go of the 501c3. If you already have 501c3 status, it's a lot of work to obtain that status, and there may be reasons why you want to hold on to it and keep it just for the purposes that it's good for. And the things that a 501c3, a corporate nonprofit, are good for is things like getting government grants that are only available to 501c3s. That's the main thing. It's still a lot of work to maintain the tax-exempt status of that 501c3. So if you're not going to use it for that purpose, I would just let it go. And all you do is just create the new organization as a 508c1a, a free church, and then just transfer your bank accounts and everything over that.
And why?
And the benefits of doing so are all of the benefits that we've talked about here regarding privacy, regarding the legal protections, regarding the religious freedom protections. If you have a 501c3, you exist by the permission of the state, and the state can revoke your tax-exempt status simply because you paid yourself too much. Your overhead is too high. You didn't give enough money to the causes you say you support. You didn't file a tax return. You filed your tax return incorrectly. Like a whole bunch of different arbitrary rules and regulations that you have to comply with in order to maintain your tax-exempt status. By being a 508c1a free church, you're automatically assumed to be tax-exempt. that status does not come from the government, and so the government can't take it away. And you exist in private, so you don't have to file tax returns. You don't have a pre-made set of rules that you have to follow for your governance structure. That's really important. I know a friend who is a brilliant, visionary human being who's dedicated his life to helping the children of the world, created a nonprofit designed around giving next level, new paradigm education to children, inspired some super wealthy heirs to some fortune to donate a ton of money to buy this epic piece of property that used to be a Boy Scout camp with a lake and all this stuff. He invited a few friends on his board of directors, moved onto the property, and within months they had a personal dispute over a child that he had with one of the young women. Another man stepped in between their familial dispute, and there was an altercation that caused the police to be called. Long story short, his friends voted him out of the board of directors as per the rules that 501c3 corporations must follow. And everything that he worked for his whole life and all of this money that he raised and this property that he purchased was all stolen from him because the governance structure was such that the government created it and the government was enforcing it, and all the board had to do was call the police, and that created a situation where he wasn't able to defend his rights, and he was totally screwed by other people abusing that legal system. So that's just an example.
I don't believe we asked this. So if you're an LLC or a C Corp, what is the transition for that?
The same. These are completely different types of entities, and so you don't transform one into the other. You create the free church, and then whatever you had going on, the LLC or what kind of corp you had, you just decide what to do with it. Does it serve a purpose? Then keep it. Sometimes having an LLC has a purpose. You can use it in the world really easily because it's compatible with the world in a really simple way, whereas a private association has some extra steps to go through when interacting with certain kinds of institutions and stuff because it's private.
So, what if you have money in your LLC, you want to stop using it, and you just donate that money to the PMA? Move the money into that. You can, but you need to consult with a tax professional in whatever tax jurisdiction you're in. Typically, a LLC has a limit on the percentage of its income or assets that it can donate to a nonprofit that qualifies for a tax deduction. So all that means is, yes, you can donate all your money to the church, but you can only get a tax deduction on a percentage of that, maybe 25%, and that varies state by state, so you have to check with your state. But if you're already being smart with your money and taking all your deductions and all of that, then maybe you don't have a high tax liability to begin with. So that's not an issue. You can also reinvest that money as per the rules of LLCs. Could you take a commercial transaction, or would it just be like, let's say I want to sell solar to another client, but I want to do it as my PMA so that I don't have to pay taxes? Is there a way to structure it so that that's legal?
Sure, yeah, that would be like just, a private transaction. Like, think about if you sold someone some solar panels on Craigslist, or sold a vehicle to someone on Craigslist, you would draw up a bill of sale. You know, that's just a document declaring the nature of your transaction. It lists who is involved. It lists what is being transacted. So, you know, the complications with that are things like, are you a rep of a solar corporation that you're getting that you're representing, and how does that relationship work and things like that. But if you just went out and purchased a bunch of solar equipment and then advertised and sold it to your clients and installed it for them, you can do that privately. And you don't need a church for that, really. I mean, it protects you from liability to some degree, but you know, you can create private contracts that have built in a lot of liability. The main thing here is structuring your business so that you can advertise your services in such a way that is not taxable and non-profit. Whereas if you're just doing it privately, like over Craigslist, you're not really advertising a business. You're just a private individual offering a private transaction.
So just to make this really clear, let's say as RJ DeLong, my person,
Yep.
I sell something on Craigslist and I get a check written to RJ DeLong, that's income to my person that I have to pay taxes on. Even though it's a private transaction, isn't that true that I still owe taxes on it?
That is absolutely correct. And that's why you would want to have an entity to pass that through, so that's not your personal income.
Right. So it sets up the PMA, and then the checks written to the PMA, then it's tax exempt.
Right, and that's only the case, again, because you're doing it as a business, right? If you just had, you know, a bunch of equipment you wanted to sell it, you could do that, and you wouldn't have to claim it as income because it's not like, you know, I mean, technically you would. But you're talking about creating a solar kind of business under the auspices of a nonprofit structure.
Yeah, I mean,
and that is possible, and we can talk about how you'd want to present yourself to others and to the world in order to make that legit. Because there's some gray area there, and it mostly has to do with how you come across to the public. Because if a member of, let's say, an IRS agent is observing what you're doing, and you're advertising on social media or different places, they're going to look at the language that you're using and make a determination if you're operating a for-profit business and simply calling it a nonprofit in order to evade taxes.
Yeah, so from my point of view, solar panels would fit into regeneration. So you could say you're serving the intentional regeneration for the Universal Spiritual Ministry as a PMA, and provided that you are truly giving the majority of your resources to a community or a cause, not just to yourself, and therefore operating as a non-profit, or I want to reframe it as a for prosperity organisation rather than non-profit, then it would be tax.
Yep.
There's a question from Oi. I want to space ready.
Can you put can a trust own a Anchor DAO, or can a DAO own a trust?
There's not an ownership relationship between those types of instruments.
The DAO is the tool.
So there's no need for a trust?
The trust would be the thing that owns
yes,
that.
Yes or no? Is there no need for a trust?
It depends in what circumstances, not yes or no answer.
Okay.
Like, for example, you can put land into a trust that will declare a legal framework of this gets passed down over 100 generations and has a legal framework around it, and can host some other governance on that land, but they're like two separate entities. There's a trust and then there's the DAO.
The DAO is the tool, the trust is the entity.
Right. So is it, So the PMA can own the trust?
The PMA can be the trust. PMA can own the land.
The trust owns the land, nothing owns the trust. A trust is a private contract between a trustee and a grantor and a beneficiary, and sometimes those are the same person. There's always two different people, at least though. And it's important also, go ahead, but I just want to say real quick, a 508 church can own land and hold it in trust, right? And then the board of directors decides what happens to the property that the church owns. They're like stewards of that property in a similar way that a lawyer or someone that you would hire to be your trustee would over whatever asset is in that trust.
And that same thing happened at the PMAs.
Yeah, so what I was saying to Oye is the PMA can be the trust, the same way you're saying that the ministry can be the trust. Because the PMA can have its own unique EIN number, which can then own anything, shares, land, whatever. There's a question from Alex.
Yeah, I mean, you partly answered it, but your conversation started talking about trusts, and I'm still unclear whether, so before it was church, PMA, and then you asked about trusts. Like, where's the trust, what is it, and how does it fit in the picture?
So we're not talking about trusts in this presentation right now because it's not a necessary component for us to do what we're doing. The ministry can own the land and therefore doesn't need a trust or act as a trust, same as the PMA. The trust is a completely separate form of legal structure, also operating in the private realm, but it's a completely different topic.
Are there any other entities besides the 508c1a and PMAs that are within this kind of sphere of what we're talking about?
Question is,
What was the question?
are there any other entities like a 508c1a or a PMA
That are within this sphere that
that
we're
are
talking
within
about?
this
For example, the
conversation?
issue of role of
context?
trusts in this type of setup.
Not really. I mean, a trust is just something to protect an asset and to keep it private. But it's usually just to benefit a single person or like a private family or something. Whereas if a church or a PMA or a private association owns the land, they steward the land, and the land is still kept in private, where no individual owns it, which is typically the purpose of a trust. But in this case, because it's a church that owns the land, you have whatever governance structure of the church gets to decide what to do with the land rather than a single beneficiary of a trust.
Yeah, so what I was asking was more just, are there any other entities we should be aware of? So like on the public side, we'd be talking about LLCs, we'd be talking about C Corps, we'd be talking about B Corps, S Corps. So like, are there anything else besides the 508(1)(ca) or C1a or the PMAs that we should be aware of in this set of business?
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the private side of law, it's really all about contract. And contracts come in many different forms. And it's basically an agreement that two people or a person agrees to, or between two people or between a person and an organization. And so it's really about understanding all of the different ways that contracts manifest and how to work with them. So for instance, a trust is a contract. It's a form of contract. It's a contract between the trustee, the grantor, and the beneficiary, typically, where they just agree to hold this asset. It's like, I agree to hold this asset, and I agree to let you use it any way you want, and I agree to let you dictate how you want me to hold it and what the terms are. That's what that essentially is. A PMA is a type of contract where you agree to form an association that has members, and then the members agree to become members and agree to the terms of the contract. That's essentially what that is. So it really comes down to contracts, and those are the main forms that you haven't heard of, really, is the 508c1a, which is the faith-based organization, and just the regular private association, which also comes in many, many different forms, depending on what its purpose is. It could be a political party, it could be the Boy Scouts, it could be one of your new paradigm next level projects. But that's what it is, just a private association of people that choose to voluntarily associate under the terms of a specific contract.
If I create an Anchor DAO and then I know someone else who has a 508 and they want to join my Anchor DAO, can I bring them in like that? And then help them create a DAO?
See, the DAO is separated. The Ministry of the PMA is the legal tool, and the DAO is the blockchain tool. So if you have the Anchor DAO and you want to create another DAO in your ecosystem, that can be a PMA of its own, or a ministry of its own, or an LLC, like whatever legal structure it wants to be.
You know, I have somebody in my community who doesn't know what DAOs are, but they have a 508.
Yep.
So I want to bring them into a DAO so then they can create like that.
Yes, sure.
What does that mean in terms of the connection between those two? Is it really just governance and that they're governing underneath the bodies of what you set Anchor DAO to be?
Similarly, it depends on what you've got into the contracts. The intention for this club is for the Anchor DAO to receive tokens in each DAO that it incubates. So the ecosystem of DAOs is like the index fund represented by a club DAO universe. So in Oye's case, he would have his Anchor DAO that would be the index of all these other ecosystem DAOs, and they would be having some sort of relationship agreement with that anchor, which can be written into your similar to bylaws, right? We're basically going to take the bylaws and the agreements and declaration of the ministry or the PMA and put them on chain, and then that's the determining structure of the ecosystem.
And it's not quite melodic in terms of PMAs. You can't create more PMAs.
Correct. Actually, is that true? If you have one share of PMA, you can create more PMAs, right? But it would be under the umbrella of the ministry still. It doesn't limit you to one. You're not limited to one, only one.
Yeah, if you have a private association, you can just create different membership programs under the same association. In the church world, they're called, the government calls them church auxiliaries, integrated church auxiliaries. And they're basically sub-organizations of the church.
Would they have EIN as well?
No, the membership programs would be able to have their own EIN number, correct?
Integrated church auxiliaries can.
Yeah, that's like a PMA. Once you have that, so as a sub-org, this is the question, sub-org or as a PMA creating multiple membership programs, you couldn't have an EIN number for each individual membership program.
That's correct, because it's still just one, yeah, that's correct. You can't do that with the PMA, but you can with the church. Create subgroups with their own EINs.
Can you post some sample agreements of organizations under the ministry that you've already made and or proposals for any of us who are considering joining?
Correct, yeah. So, Teo, can you please send me, I already have the declaration, but some of the PMAs we've created, for example, Tribal Days, I have them already, I don't actually need to send them to me. But any other templates you have for these guys to review?
I've got some printed out for
Yeah, I didn't hear what was read. Was someone reading something or saying something?
The question
Didn't
was,
catch it.
can we share some template documentation? So some examples of a PMA structure under the ministry, and of course the declaration itself for the ministry. So if someone's considering setting up a PMA with the universe, what does that template look like?
Yeah, we can show people templates. I just require an agreement not to take those templates and use them without permission. But yeah, it's important to know also that the templates are like just a super basic generic foundation that you build upon. So I'm happy to show someone those templates if they're considering joining us. However, it's important to know that as they evolve their organization, they're going to be fleshing out their governance structure and all of these kinds of things that aren't already in the template, because that's what it is, a template.
And that's why I was asking for prior examples also.
Yep.
Right.
Thanks.
I have a question. I am building an e-commerce business, and I just want to go a little bit deeper into just the simplicity of transitioning to PMA, and how do you interact with other businesses, and many suppliers and things like that. I'm still trying to get my head around it, go a little bit deeper into day-to-day operations, like how does this work with multiple supply chains and things like that. Yeah, in terms of taxes and paying bills and things like that. I'm just a little bit confused. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Paying bills is pretty simple. You have a bank account that just pays bills, and you're doing it in the name of the PMA. The tax is more complex. It depends on what jurisdiction you're operating in. Tax laws are different in every country.
It depends on what your business nature is, too. What are you selling in your business?
It's similar to solar water solutions. Solutions. Yeah.
Water technology solutions.
Yeah. Yeah, for something like that, it's it's not a bad idea to keep an LLC around and have the LLC be like a management corporation. And ideally have it incorporated somewhere like Delaware that has really strong tax laws and privacy laws. And then you can just reinvest all of the money that LLC makes back into itself and into the PMA or the FBO, faith-based church organization. And that way you have sort of both, and you can be building business credit at the same time of taking advantage of the privacy and the tax exemption and nonprofit status of the 508.
Can I challenge that, Theo? Why? What's the point of having the LLC and having something like that when, as a PMA, if you're operating in the non-profit way where you're giving the majority of your resources to a cause, to a community, to the mission, why have an LLC?
Well, there could be a variety of uses that it could be useful for. Building business credit is an example I use. So if you have a business, some people want to be completely divorced from the commercial side of the law and from taxes altogether, and they want nothing to do with it. Other people want maximum advantage in terms of the privacy of the taxes, but they also want the advantages of building business credit that only comes from operating to some degree in the business world. LLCs also are helpful, if you wanted to be a distributor for another company, that LLC might interface with a distribution company easier than a private association would, because that distribution company is set up to deal with LLCs. They're not set up to deal with associations, and that would require a conversation potentially. So it's just a way to grease the wheels in terms of complex business situations where you have distributorships and stuff like that. And if you're in that world, you might want to build business credit as well. However, you might not, and you might want to be just divorced from that world completely. So I'm just offering it as a potential, depending on who you are and what your goals are and your entire orientation. So that's what I would say to that.
Thank you.
Can I ask a further question?
Yes.
Hey, Theo, it's Bobby. So I'm
Hey, Bobby.
Hi, babes. Good to see you. So what I'm curious about is one of the benefits of having an LLC being like, if you have something like a service or product that you don't want to be in a position of like, this is donation based, but you just want to charge a solid price and receive the money for that. Is that one of the reasons to have an LLC?
Yes, if you're doing something that's overtly commercial, there's usually all kinds of things that you have to do to make it conform to a non-commercial, non-profit model. And sometimes it's helpful just to have that for-profit entity that is the bucket for just the for-profit activity. Like, for example, I had a friend who has a business that during the pandemic blew up because it was like health related. It was like essential oils and stuff like that. And he wanted a way to sell his products to a private membership and thus avoid taxes that way. And we set up like a 3-pronged business model for him where some of his products are distributed to members that pay a membership fee that's a monthly fee. And they get benefits such as free essential oils and little products and stuff sent to them every month. Other people just purchase from his website as a random new customer and use the for-profit front end that went to a for-profit company, which then donates its profits to the nonprofit side that runs the membership program. And he had another way that he distributed his stuff as well through events and things. But this way he had all these sort of bases covered and he was playing in each one and had ways to get his products out under a variety of ways and a tax strategy to deal with it essentially.
Could I ask a follow-up question to this? So then most of the revenue at the end went to the not-for-profit association. But wouldn't an institution like an IRS double down and be like, wait a second, this is just tax evasion in this particular case? How do you, what's the general good cause that he's financing? Or was it just the fact that he's distributing these projects through the other entity, not the LLC?
Well, in order to avoid tax evasion, you just have to consult with a tax professional in your tax jurisdiction. But all of these strategies that we're talking about are legit legal strategies for tax avoidance, not tax evasion. It's totally legit to have a membership program where you pay a monthly fee as a member and you get some benefit, something sent to you every month as a benefit of membership. And that is within a private association setting and is non-taxable. So he does pay taxes, but only on the for-profit sales from non-members, like first-time customers who just purchased from his website, not people part of his membership, not people who come to his events, and those sort of things. And so his tax burden is much smaller because it's only that for-profit side. And the tax form that he has to file is only on what came from that for-profit front end. So in other words, he doesn't have to write what he's claiming for his membership program on his for-profit tax form because it's a separate entity. So,
I understood that.
it's,
I understood that.
what's that?
Yeah, I understood that part.
Okay.
I was actually more wondering about the part where you said from the for-profit is also taken apart as a donation, which then I assume becomes deductible from taxes also, and giving that to that other association, which is supposed to have sort of a not-for-profit purpose. That transaction there is what I was most wondering about.
Got it, yes, and that would be that a for-profit, like say an LLC, is allowed to donate to any kind of nonprofit and receive a tax deduction, but only up to a certain cap of that LLC's income. So it doesn't get 100% a tax deduction on 100% of its income if it donates 100%. It's only like 25%. But it can reduce its taxes by, say, 25% by donating that amount to the nonprofit. Then it can reinvest another 25%. Then it has, overhead, and then, it only has to pay actual taxes on a small percent left.
Got it, thank you.
So good tax principle for anyone who's an LLC, you want to write off everything else.
Okay, so guys, I have to leave. It's 3 o'clock and I have a hard stop. Tayo, I'm happy for you to answer a couple more questions in the room.
Okay.
How do we engage you after this for advice?
What's that?
How do people get in touch with you after this? Shall I just share your number in my membership Telegram group so everyone can reach you, or how do you want to do it?
Yeah, my name is Teo Allenstar. You can give people my email address, tao.uniphi@gmail.com. That's TAO.UNIPHI, Unify, @gmail.com. Yeah, I got to get on top of redesigning my website so I can give that out, but it's in the works.
Okay, so final question, Tayo, what's the setup cost for I can answer that for you as well. So for a PMA, maybe you want to say, Tayo, you can say. Cost of setting up a PMA right now?
Well, a new FBO or a sub-org, are they the same price?
PMA.
Or both.
And a new FBO.
Yeah,
So
both.
it's $5,000 for a new FBO, and I think it's $500 for a PMA. Is that right?
I'm not clear on the new PMA aspect of it. It kind of depends.
What state is this being generated from?
It's not from a state. Okay. Yeah, it's separate from state.
When you go to get your EIN, like you have to put no state, or
How do you acquire the EIN?
You do need an address in the United States, so it's whoever is applying needs to give an address, and that is the address that the IRS has on file. So they can send a letter to that address if they ever wanted to get in touch with you for any reason. I've never heard of any of these organizations ever receiving a letter from the IRS ever, but that is a requirement for obtaining an EIN. So it doesn't really matter what state the address is in, it just cannot be a PO box.
what's receiving the $500? Say, who are we paying $500 to? Say, okay, so our legal advisor. Yeah, okay.
But I think there's some clarity that needs to come through on what the cost is for the PMA. The price of $500 is when you set up a PMA with the Universe Ministries of the existing FBO. Okay. For this club. If you're setting up a PMA in a different jurisdiction, maybe there's different costs. I think
And I say it depends also because I know you have some international folks that may need to use me as a registered agent and use my address to receive mail and things like that.
And that's just
which is also an option.
Is that just a one-time 500, or is there an annual maintenance thing that we need to have?
If it's just for the setup, it's a one-time thing.
Could you prepare something, like a one-page thing that gets sent out to all of us?
A one-pager, Taya, there's a request for a one-pager.
Like costs for this?
Breakdown of costs and services.
Yeah. And
Sure.
we don't all have to pay it.
Yeah, I have a proposal document. It's basically a two-pager.
Perfect.
And it details everything that I'm providing. And it lists the information that I need to create the new organization. It has the financial donation request, and it has my request to not redistribute the legal documents in any way. So that already exists. I'm happy to forward that to Will again so he can forward it to you all.
Thank you very much. So, to respect the time of the container, is there any final questions? Burning, desiring, we're good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to connect with all you beautiful people. Hey. Great. Yeah, will someone send me the recording of this once you have it together?
Yeah, I'll get it sent to me and I'll send it to you.
Great.
All right, Sarah, thank you so much for your time. I know it's late. It's late for you too. It must be like midnight right now, eh?
Yeah, it's just past midnight. It's okay, I'm a night owl. I'm feeling great.
All right, brother, thanks. Speak soon. Take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's go see that.
I just want to tell you guys that we now have the directory ready.
Oh, yay!
So we've been through a few iterations. The first one was we just copy and pasted all of your answers from your application forms and created it. And then we're like, we need you guys to be able to edit it and add in more information.
Yeah.
So we created a membership portal. And then we realized, oh, actually there's this requirement or desire for you guys to share educational content and upload courses and maybe even chat with each other. So then we were like, okay, we'll use a different platform. So it's not completely how we want it yet, but it's getting there. And right now you can sign up and create an account. And in the process you'll be asked questions like what your project is, what your offering is, what you're interested in, what you're already involved in, so why you're here at the incubator. So for example, you're interested in health and wellness, spirituality, you can choose multiple options, you create the account. And there's going to be an upvoting system. So all of your offerings that you're wishing to share during this incubator, the fact is there's just not enough time to include it. It's already 20 offerings that you've received. It's not possible to include everyone. So what we've decided to do is give the power to the people with a voting mechanism, and you can upvote the things that you really want to experience whilst you're here in this container. And then we can prioritise them to this experience. So please be patient. If there's bugs, just screenshot and send it to me, and I'll make sure the team continue working on it as best they can. So enjoy the experience, and hopefully this helps you understand more of who each other are, what you're working on, and how you can connect and play. And once you've populated the platform, we will create the mirror board, the map of the ecosystems. There's something visual for everyone to see clearly as well.
And just announcements.
Yep, DAOuniverse.club.
And Will, just announcements is at 3:30. Zach has the Agang Ballroom.